Today, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau spoke with U.S. President Donald Trump. Among other issues, they discussed the U.S. extradition request for Huawei's CFO, Meng Wanzhou. According to the Prime Minister's office, quote, the Prime Minister thanked the President for the strong statements of support by the United States in response to the arbitrary detention of 2 Canadians in China. The 2 leaders agreed to continue to seek their release. The phone call comes as a Canadian delegation in China is walking a fine line this week there to promote stronger ties between the 2 countries while raising the issue, of course, of the 2 Canadians in custody now for nearly a month. Michael Kovrig and Michael Spavor were detained after Canada arrested Huawei's CFO on a request from American authorities. So what was the response from Chinese officials? Are we any closer to resolving this diplomatic standoff? Conservative MP and Vice Chair of the Canada-China Legislative Association, Michael Cooper, is in Shanghai, and he joins us via Skype from there. Hi, Mr. Cooper. Thanks for your time. Thanks for getting up so early for us. Appreciate it.
Hi, Dashi.
I want to start off by asking you, who did you raise Michael Kovrig and Michael Spavor's cases with, and what kind of answers have you received?
We had a few meetings. I guess the key meetings were with the Shanghai Academy of Social Sciences, which is a large academic institution that has a lot of links with universities and other academic institutions and science research, including in Canada, as well as with the Vice Deputy General of the Shanghai People's Congress. And I guess if you were to put that in Canadian terms, that would be more or less like the Deputy Mayor of the city of Shanghai. So we conveyed the Canadian message about our serious concern about the detention of Mr. Spavor and Mr. Kovrig, the fact that it is an arbitrary detention, and we emphasized the fact that it's not business as usual and can't be business as usual so long as these 2 Canadians are detained. So that message was conveyed loud and clear by our delegation.
Was it received? What was the response?
Well, the response was, I guess, to some degree more of the same in terms of a reiteration of the position that the Chinese government has taken, including the Chinese embassy in Canada. But nonetheless, the message was heard, and I believe it was important to get that message across.
Did you raise the issue? Did you and your colleagues raise the issue, or was it the people you were with on the Chinese side raising the issue of Meng Wanzhou being detained here in Canada, or the extradition request?
They did raise the issue with respect to Ms. Meng, and in that regard, we emphasized the fact that her arrest is pursuant to Canada's international obligations, pursuant to an extradition treaty that we have with the United States, and that an ultimate determination of what happens to her, whether she is extradited to the United States or not, is based upon the law. It will be based upon the facts that are presented to a court totally independent of politics, who will consider those facts and apply the law to those facts. And we emphasized that that is the independent nature of our judiciary, the independent nature of law enforcement, the fact that this is not a decision that was made by the executive or by the legislative branch, and that it would be entirely inappropriate for either to intervene, that is seized by our courts at this time.
In all honesty, do you think there's any chance they believe that?
Look, I think that they've got to take it at face value. Perhaps there's some misunderstandings or some differences of understanding in terms of what our court system is, what are the independence of our judiciary in China. That same independence doesn't necessarily exist with respect to their judiciary. So we tried to convey that message as best we could, and I think it did get across.
Are there any meetings planned with other figures, I guess. I take your point that you raised it with, somebody like the deputy mayor or the Academy of Social Sciences, but are there any more high-level meetings in which you can raise these issues?
We will be raising this issue. I guess I can't speak on behalf of all the delegation, but I can say if yesterday was any indication, all of my colleagues who run the delegation are as committed as I am to raising this issue. And yes, I do intend to raise this issue because, quite frankly, when we talk about the important bilateral relationship between Canada and China, in terms of trade, investment, strong people-to-people links, and so on, it's very difficult to talk about how we can move forward when there is this elephant in the room, namely the fact that we have 2 Canadians who have been arbitrarily detained without, for all intents and purposes, access to consular services, without access to legal representation, who are in detention conditions that are completely unacceptable. Those points were also raised.
Former ambassador to China, Canadian Ambassador David Mulroney, told CBC that this trip should have been postponed, that your trip should have been postponed, because it sends the wrong message, that the message is that by going there, you're saying the relationship between Canada and China is unchanged. I want to read exactly what he said. To suggest somehow this is about parliamentary process and the rule of law at a time when China is so manifestly ignoring the rule of law is also not just confusing but harmful. What's your response to that?
Well, I read Mr. Mulroney's comments as well, and I believe, and I can't speak for Mr. Mulroney, but as I read his comments, it was in the larger context that somehow this issue of the detention of the 2 Canadians, Mr. Spavor, Mr. Kovrig, was not going to be raised, and in fact, it was raised. We conveyed that it is not business as usual. And further to that, in terms of this delegation, it was planned before their detention. And we consulted with Global Affairs Canada, with our embassy officials, with our consul general here in Shanghai. And the message was consistent, that it was better to proceed and that it was helpful that we're here. So that's the basis upon which I'm participating.
Do you feel that there will be any kind of tangible improvement or tangible movement, I guess, on the issue because of your visit? Realistically, after your conversations so far, do you feel that will occur?
I think it's important to emphasize that we were not initially here because of this issue. This is not why we initially came, although now that that has happened, of course, it is the overriding issue. And further to that, the officials that we are meeting with are not directly involved. They do not have a direct say on the fate of either of the 2 Canadians. But I believe that getting the message across, conveying that message wherever possible is constructive, and that's what we did, and I think that's what others are doing, and so in that regard, I believe it is helpful.
Quickly before I let you go, another former ambassador, Guy Saint-Jacques, on this program said that his advice would be for the Foreign Affairs Minister to head over to conduct these types of conversations on a different level. Based on your experience, do you think that would be effective?
Well, I think that's a possibility. Obviously, the government's going to have to consider a range of options. But what I can say is that as a member of this delegation, I'm trying to do whatever small part I can play, and I know the other members of our delegation feel the same way, to do what we can to convey the issue and to reiterate the message of the government of Canada to the Chinese officials that we meet with.
All right. Thank you so much, Mr. Cooper. Appreciate your time.
Thanks, Vashi.
As of January